ocean is one of the vital gifts of God to man. It offers various ecosystem services that enable human existence on Earth. Covering about 1/3 of the Earth's surface, the ocean or the marine environment helps in climate regulation, providing supporting services and cultural services apart from its provision of food and medical resources. How we can develop the sector for Africa's prosperity and long-term development are some of the sectoral issues that will be on the front burner on Maritime Radar. I'm Nneoma Obi-Asualo. Over the years, man's bid to cultivate and harness the natural resources for survival and development has been threatening the ocean's ability to offer its services to man. Today, waters are exposed to all sorts of threats from human exploitation and environmental pollution. As resource managers and homekeepers, African women have been actively involved in tree planting, combating windstorms, and the management of communal water resources as they have more intense contact with the environment and suffer more from environmental degradation. This has and should continue to deepen their understanding and commitment to ecological preservation. Before we get further into today's episode, let's find out the latest in maritime news.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
The Nigerian Customs Services says it has sacked and prosecuted over 2,000 of its officers that were found wanting since 2015. The Comptroller General of Customs, Colonel Hamid Ali, disclosed this to journalists at the 54th session of the State House ministerial briefing. He said that over 2,000 officers have been dismissed for one form of misconduct or complicity since they took over as the head of the service. He noted that Customs had also collected 2.14 trillion naira so far in 2022, as against the projected 3.2 trillion naira, adding that the shortfall was because the federal government was yet to commence collection of telecommunications tax. Transnet and the union representing the majority of its workers, the United National Transport Union, have reached a 3-year wage agreement after severe strike action. The agreement is applicable from April 1st, 2022 until March 31st, 2025 in a process mediated by the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration. Transnet has also partially lifted the force majeure that is put in place because of the disruption caused by the strike. The second union involved in the strike, South African Transport and Allied Workers Union, called off its strike a day after Transnet and UNTU reached an agreement. India's government has approved the construction of 2 new terminals in Deen Dayal Port, Kandal. One of the terminals is a multipurpose berth and the other a container terminal. The 2 terminals will equip Deen Dayal Port for handling next-generation deep bed vessels and greatly expand the port's capabilities. The cost of the project, which is estimated to be around $720 million, will be a government and private entities partnership, and the government is offering a concession period of 30 years, extendable by 20 more years for the concessionaire that received either of the 2 projects. The container terminal, once complete, will have a capacity of 2.19 million TEU per annum, whereas the multi-purpose cargo terminal will have an optimal operating capacity of 18.33 MPTA. The new terminals are expected to significantly reduce congestion at the port and reduce the turnaround time for vessels. The Malaysian police has found a dead body in a 40-foot container at Penang port sent from Chittagong port. The container, which was sent to the Malaysian port from the BM container depot in Chittagong, where a fire broke out on the 4th of June and chemical blast killed 49 people and injured hundreds. The local agent of the vessel carrying the container, Swazdin Atlantic, operated by Sinacor Merchant Marine, said Malaysian police are now investigating the matter.
Africa needs its own storytellers, people who understand the continent because they're from it. People who know that news is more than just a conversation starter, it's our stories. Because these stories run deeper than headlines and segments. It's about digging deeper to get the facts and telling the human side of every single story, not just the echoes from foreign headlines and perspectives. It's time to take back our narratives and share them in our voices. The birth of Africa's New Age reporting, and this is where it begins, right here at News Central TV, with stories that put Africa first.
This is Maritime Radar. This episode is a call for African women to arise as community activists and environmental advocates to take their place in decision making and ensure their voice is heard on sustainable human development. I spoke to Monica Mbanefo, former Director, Technical Cooperation Division, International Maritime Organization IMO, and a visiting professor, International Maritime Law Institute Malta, on the economic viability of the blue economy. Stay with us. The scope of interpretation of the term blue economy varies. How will you define blue economy?
Well, yes, it really varies. The World Bank defines it in a different way. The European Commission, all the other organizations have their own definition. But simply put, I will say that blue economy are all economic activities carried out in our seas, oceans, lakes, rivers, all our waters. But not just to raise funds, not just to have money and finances, but also done in a way that is sustainable, healthy and sustainable. Sustainability is crucial. We cannot spend or use up everything that God has given this world. We have to make it sustainable so that the generations that come after us will also benefit. When we say blue, yes, blue refers to water and oceans because we see the color of the sea mainly is blue. But we don't just say blue because of the color, but blue, purity, cleanliness. We have to avoid pollution both from the air and the waters, so that all the species in our waters and the use of our waters will be done in a way that is sustainable.
You have mentioned several potentials of our waters, so it's imperative we protect them. So what conversation should we be having around this, protecting our seas and oceans?
Yes, our seas and oceans have been protected in many ways. Take, for instance, the International Maritime Organization, where I was a director for 20 years. Well, their main job is safety of shipping, protection of the marine environment. Now, the environment is taken very seriously. What we can do is for our governments, particularly African governments, to comply with all the regulations that enable us to keep our waters and our environment clean. We can combine, like the IMO World Maritime Day theme, when we talk about green shipping. When we talk about green shipping, we mean clean shipping. IMO has made so many regulations to keep the oceans clean. For example, the latest the one now they call the IMO 20. This one has set a limit for sulfur oxide emitted and sulfur oxide content in the fuel oil used on board ships. The limit before was 3.5%. For instance, they had to amend Annex 6 of MAPO in order to effect this. What I would advise the African governments and countries to do is compliance. Compliance, it is on the duty of governments, flag states, and port states. Flag states are the states of registry of vessels. Port states are the ports they call in. It is their duty to enforce regulations. If we take this latest regulation, this limit I'm talking about, a compliance certificate should be issued by the flag state to its vessel. Otherwise, that vessel has no right to sail. Then, when it calls at a port, each vessel, it has to be inspected. They say that some organizations back, they don't bite. IMO backs and bites. That's why the port state control is very important. So when the vessels call on port states, our governments, African governments, should inspect properly. Each vessel must present this certificate. It's international certificate for air pollution prevention. If it doesn't present, if the vessel doesn't have it, they have to do what is their duty, detain that vessel until it complies. So in doing that, we at least make our waters and our seas and our air cleaner, because these pollutants, they affect populations that live around the ports, the coasts, and our waters. And apart from the air pollution, a lot of dumping is done into the sea, like ballast water. Governments are supposed to have reception facilities for ballast waters to be emptied into, because the vessels have to empty their ballast water. But you find that in many African governments or countries, they don't have this. So what do these vessels do? They flush their ballast water into the territorial waters.
So how can we ensure that African governments do this?
By AU, talking to each other, everybody telling their administrations. After all, they send delegates to IMO. They are parties to these conventions. Now, you see, one major problem is this. Because of the competing priorities in Africa, as being an African, I know the problem they have. Now, take a government take our own country, Nigeria, for instance, like many other African countries. Kids die before they are 5. And we know why. Poverty, hunger, no medicines. Most women die when they are giving birth. The slightest illness, malaria, simple things kill because people are too poor and there are no medicines. There are no roads, no light, not even drinking water. Now, so the governments concentrate on these issues, which the people can see. Then for them, what is outside their shore is something else. But what they don't understand is the importance of the maritime industry. What do we do in developing countries in Africa? We export raw materials. If we cannot manage our ports and our facilities for export properly, we cannot export efficiently. So instead of exporting 100%, we'll be exporting only 5 or 10%. In which case, we cannot make enough money to carry out those priority projects. If your goods don't go to the ports where they can be sold, then you cannot have the money to do the job you're supposed to do. Secondly, we import almost everything we use. The heavy machinery, to build schools and hospitals and everything, we need to import them. If our maritime industry, if our ports and all the facilities meant for bringing these things in are not efficient, we are punishing ourselves. Now, take for instance, ship owners, they charge much more going to African countries than they charge to other countries. And who carries the brunt? Who pays this excess? The common man in the street. Why do they charge more? It's not because they don't like our face. It's because of the problems they have to undergo. In IMO, it came to the point that there's a convention which we've had for some time, facilitation convention to facilitate things at ports and shipping. But how much of this do we do? We know that we have problems. But to solve those problems, the main issue is to open up the channel through which things can come in by having an efficient maritime administration and maritime industry.
Okay, having identified these potentials, how do we maximize or how do we enjoy the opportunities for a sustainable, clean and equitable group and looking at the traditional and emerging sectors?
Yes, you see, in our traditional ways of using our waters, it didn't pollute, but it was merely getting food for our pots. That is, fishing, fish, crayfish, cook and eat. That's what water was meant for, bathing and water to drink. But today, ships carry 90%, at least 90% of goods that move around the world. Without those vessels, as I mentioned earlier, our goods cannot go to where they should go or come back. And the jobs provided by the shipping industry and the maritime industry is tremendous. Take, for instance, seafaring. I'll give you an example. Philippines provide 20% of seafarers. Philippines, just one country. And they have a decree in the country, the government, that every Filipino seafarer must transmit at least 70% of their income back home to their people. They earn in hard currency. You don't have to be a seafarer in your own national vessel. They are in other vessels. Nations need them. They need seafarers. Now, 20% of the seafarers in the world transmitting 70% of their income home. You can imagine what the government is getting out of that. Do you know the population of Africa? Healthy young men who have no jobs. Wow. We train them. We open up maritime schools.
So why is our African government not investing in this, looking at these huge opportunities?
Well, I think it's a bit of ignorance. I don't mean in a bad way. But as I said, they focus on what they can see. They have so many problems around them that they are not aware of these things. When I was a director in IMO, I went from government to government explaining these things to them, and it did help. Take, for instance, in Ethiopia. They are now landlocked, yet they send out many of their young men to train as seafarers. And Ethiopia then had 9 vessels. This was a landlocked state. So that their young men, not only can they work in foreign vessels and earn, they also work on their own vessels. Now I remember we had just one in Oron. Even after they are trained, our African seafarers, the poor things have nowhere to do sea time. Sea time is like a doctor. When you've qualified, you do your housemanship. Without doing housemanship, you cannot be employed as a doctor. Without doing sea time, you cannot be employed as a seafarer. So they have a lot of problems. Now, apart from seafaring, you have shipbreaking. At least 1,000 heavy vessels have got to their end of time. and they are broken up. This provides a lot of jobs, particularly in Southeast Asia. Many scrap metal, very useful ones. Even the equipment used on these vessels, they are needed and they are sold for money. Now, what of fishing? Yes, traditionally, we did our little fishing on our canoes, fed our people. Now, when I went to Lagos, the fish market, all they had were little fish. Even mackerel is now out of people's reach because our waters, not Nigerian vessels. So many vessels have wiped out the fish in our waters. That is what I'm saying about sustainability. Sustainability. When we say blue economy, we've got to preserve what we have. Fish, we know in Africa, is one of the top protein diets.
The blue economy is a very important opportunity for women in Africa. I was going to ask what opportunity is it for them? If you can say that in 30 seconds.
Opportunities are tremendous. Shipbearing, yes, particularly. You know, before shipping was a man's domain because the seas were dangerous and all that, and they needed muscles to do the sails. But today, shipping is just as good as driving your car or flying an aeroplane. So women, all you need is your brains. And so that is open to men, it's open to the women today because of modern shipping. Then on top of that, administration, like working in the ports and so many other aspects, because the maritime trade industry is not just going on vessel and moving. The ports are even more important.
It's been Monica Mbane for talking to us about blue economy and the opportunities for Africa. She is the former director, Technical Cooperation Division, IMO, and a visiting professor, International Maritime Law Institute in Malta. Thank you very much for coming on the program.
This is Africa. I bet you've heard a lot about it. But this is what you need to know. It's the home of the youngest and fastest growing population in the world. This, my friend, is opportunity right here. This is the future, and everyone wants Africa's attention. You need a voice that's African, young, conversational, a platform with the potential to reach millions of people across the continent with content they can relate to, such as lifestyle shows, sports and news, just the way they love it. Imagine all the people you could be talking to on News Central TV. Well, don't just think about it. Contact us for sponsorship and advert bookings. Put your brand where Africa is watching. It's News Central TV.
And that's a wrap on this week's episode. Every week, join us on Maritime Radar as we explore how Africa can unlock the latent potential of its maritime industry and its connected sector. You can also expect the latest in maritime news and industry insights right here. I'm Nneoma Obi-Asualo. Many thanks for watching.